Most people don't notice the change all at once. It usually happens slowly. One morning, the coffee feels weaker. Another morning, it smells good, but somehow tastes empty. Then eventually, people start buying stronger and darker coffee just trying to feel something familiar again. And that's where people quietly realize something strange. Coffee doesn't feel the same anymore. Not necessarily worse every single time. Just different. Flatter, harsher, less comforting, less memorable. And many people assume they simply need stronger coffee now. But that may not actually be the real problem, because a lot of modern coffee is no longer designed mainly around comfort or flavor experience. It's designed around shelf life, shipping, mass production, consistency at enormous scale. And once people start noticing that, they begin seeing it almost everywhere, especially longtime coffee drinkers. Many of them remember coffee feeling richer years ago, even when it was cheaper, simpler, and far less premium than what fills supermarket shelves today. Because the experience itself used to feel more alive. Years ago, people recognized coffee by smell before anything else. The aroma filled the kitchen. It stayed in the room. It felt warm and grounding before the first sip even happened. Now, many coffees smell strong for 30 seconds, then disappear almost immediately. And once people notice that difference, it becomes difficult to completely ignore afterward. A lot of supermarket coffee today is built around consistency first. That sounds practical because consistency matters. Nobody wants coffee tasting completely different every week. But consistency quietly created another problem too. Everything slowly started moving closer together. Different brands, different bags, different promises. Yet many coffees now land in almost the exact same place. Dark, heavy, sharp, smoky. Not because every coffee bean naturally tastes like that, but because darker roasting became one of the easiest ways to standardize massive coffee production. And darker roasting can hide a lot. It can hide age, hide inconsistency, hide weaker beans, hide flavor differences. But eventually something else disappears too. Character. Many coffees today are roasted to taste strong, not to taste alive. And the strange part is that most daily coffee drinkers don't fully notice this while drinking coffee every single morning. They simply feel less satisfied over time. That's why many people keep increasing intensity, trying to recover the comfort they remember from older coffee experiences. Extra dark roast, extra bold blends, extra caffeine. Yet somehow the experience keeps feeling thinner emotionally, especially for people who drink coffee every single day. Daily coffee drinkers remember patterns. They remember how coffee used to feel during quiet mornings, during work breaks, during long conversations, during weekends at home. The coffee itself felt calmer, rounder, more distinct. Now many coffees feel engineered to impress the first sip instead of staying enjoyable through the entire cup. That's a major difference. Because older coffee experiences were often built around comfort over stimulation. Today, a lot of coffee feels built around impact. Bigger flavor, bigger bitterness, bigger roast, bigger boldness. Coffee became louder without becoming more memorable. And after a while, many coffees stop tasting unique entirely. They simply taste darker than each other. That's why some people suddenly realize they're adding more cream, more sugar, or more flavored syrup than they used to years ago. Not always because their preferences changed. Sometimes the coffee underneath changed too. And if you've noticed coffee tasting different lately, you're probably not imagining it. A lot of long-time coffee drinkers quietly feel the same way. And I'd actually like to know when you first started noticing it. Because for many people, the shift happened slowly enough that they almost ignored it at first. Until one day, coffee simply stopped feeling as comforting as it used to. And one of the biggest reasons this happened may have almost nothing to do with caffeine itself. It has more to do with freshness than many people realize. Years ago, people often bought smaller amounts more frequently from local places with faster turnover. Even supermarket coffee sometimes moved quicker because people treated coffee differently. Now, massive supply chains prioritize stability and long shelf life first. Again, practical. But coffee is one of those products where time removes the softest qualities first. The aroma, the sweetness, the smoothness. What usually survives the longest is bitterness and roast flavor. That's one reason so many coffees today feel either too weak or too bitter with almost nothing in between. The middle ground slowly disappeared, and modern packaging sometimes makes this even more confusing. Walk through almost any supermarket coffee aisle now, and nearly every bag looks premium. Elegant fonts, matte packaging, gold labels, words like Reserve artisan small batch specialty, but appearance and drinking experience are no longer the same thing. Some of the most expensive-looking coffees in supermarkets still taste strangely flat after a few mornings. Meanwhile, certain simpler coffees quietly feel more enjoyable long-term because they were never trying so hard to perform like luxury products. That surprises many people once they begin paying attention again. Because modern coffee marketing often sells identity more than actual experience. Dark packaging suggests strength. Italian words suggest sophistication. Extra bold labels suggest quality. But stronger does not automatically mean more satisfying. And many long-time coffee drinkers are beginning to feel that difference more clearly now, because they remember coffee before everything became optimized for shelf impact and instant intensity. They remember when coffee felt more connected to routine than branding. And strangely enough, some of the coffees that still feel closest to that older experience are not always the expensive ones. Sometimes simpler medium roasts feel more alive because they allow more balance to survive. Sometimes less aggressive coffee actually feels richer over time, and that becomes obvious after a full week of drinking it, not just one dramatic first sip. Because the modern coffee world became so focused on intensity and branding that it slowly moved away from the very feeling many people originally loved. Not every coffee changed equally. There are still supermarket coffees that feel balanced, still coffees that smell alive, still coffees that remain pleasant through the entire cup instead of exhausting the palate immediately. But people now have to search harder for them because the market became crowded with coffee designed to stand out fast instead of feel satisfying long-term. And once people recognize that pattern, supermarket coffee aisles suddenly start looking very different. But coffee itself may not be the only thing that changed, because the way companies build coffee today is completely different from what many people grew up with. And once people understand that part, a lot of modern coffee suddenly starts making much more sense. And if this conversation reminds you of how coffee used to feel years ago, share it with someone who still remembers that too. One of the biggest reasons coffee changed is that modern coffee companies are no longer building coffee mainly for experience. They're building it for scale, for shelf life, for consistency, for transportation, for mass appeal, for instant recognition. And eventually, those priorities start changing the taste itself, because coffee today moves through a completely different system than it did years ago. Many coffees now sit longer before reaching the shelf, longer before being opened, longer before being brewed. And coffee is one of those products where time quietly removes the best qualities first. Not bitterness, not darkness. The softer things disappear first. The aroma, the sweetness, the smoothness, the small differences people used to notice naturally without even trying. That's why so many modern coffees feel strangely one-dimensional now. They still taste strong. But strong and satisfying are not the same thing. And that confusion became extremely common in modern coffee culture. A lot of companies realized people associate darker flavor with quality, freshness, and energy. So many coffees slowly became more aggressive over time. Darker roasting, bolder branding, stronger language, more intensity. But intensity is easier to create than balance. That's the important difference. Because balance requires better beans, better roasting control, better freshness management, better consistency throughout the process. Intensity can simply be roasted into the coffee itself. And after years of this happening across the industry, many supermarket coffees slowly started drifting toward the same flavor profile. Heavy, smoky, sharp. Not necessarily terrible, just repetitive. That's why many long-time coffee drinkers eventually start feeling bored without fully understanding why. The coffee still has caffeine, still smells like coffee, still looks dark enough. But emotionally, the experience feels flatter. Coffee became louder, without becoming more memorable. And another thing many people rarely discuss is how age changes coffee perception too, especially after 50. A lot of long-time coffee drinkers suddenly prefer smoother coffee without fully understanding why. The reason is not always preference alone. As people age, bitterness often becomes more dominant, while softer sweetness becomes harder to notice automatically. That means aggressive dark roast coffee can start feeling harsher much faster than it did years earlier. And once that happens, many people respond the wrong way. They buy even darker coffee, stronger coffee, more caffeine, more extra bold blends, trying to recover energy, while accidentally increasing the exact flavor fatigue, making coffee less enjoyable in the first place. And this is where many people quietly rediscover medium roast coffee again. Not because medium roast is trendy, because it often feels more complete. There's still body, still warmth, still richness, but there's also room for actual flavor to survive underneath the roast itself. That's something many modern dark roasts accidentally destroy, especially cheaper supermarket dark roasts, because once coffee becomes dark enough, origin differences start disappearing. Brazilian coffee, Colombian coffee, Peruvian coffee. Eventually, they all begin tasting mostly like roast instead of coffee. And that's one reason many people now say, everything tastes the same. Because sometimes it almost does, especially inside large supermarket systems. And another major shift happened quietly over the last decade. Coffee stopped being marketed mainly as comforting. It started being marketed as performance, energy, focus, productivity, strength, intensity. Even the language changed. Bold, extreme, turbo, high caffeine, extra dark. The emotional feeling around coffee became more aggressive. Years ago, coffee advertising often showed kitchens, families, morning's conversation warmth. Now, a lot of coffee marketing feels closer to sports supplements than comfort. And surprisingly, many longtime coffee drinkers notice this emotional shift immediately, even if they never describe it out loud, because the emotional role of coffee changed too. It became less connected to slowing down and more connected to pushing through exhaustion. That changes the entire experience around drinking it. And strangely enough, some simpler coffees still resist this pattern better than expensive trendy brands. Not because they're perfect, because they stayed closer to basic balance. That's why some people quietly return to coffees like 8 o'clock coffee or medium roasts from Dunkin' after trying expensive ultra-dark blends that looked far more impressive on the shelf. Not because those coffees are luxurious, because they remain drinkable day after day. And daily drinkability matters far more than dramatic first impressions, especially for longtime coffee drinkers. A lot of premium supermarket coffee today performs extremely well for 1 cup, then becomes exhausting after a week. Many coffees today are designed to impress the first sip, not comfort the 10th cup. That's something younger coffee reviewers often miss completely, because living with a coffee daily is different from tasting it once. And longtime coffee drinkers understand that naturally. They judge coffee differently, not by how shocking the first sip feels, but by how it feels over time, how it fits into routine, how comfortable it becomes, whether they genuinely want another cup tomorrow morning. That's a completely different way of evaluating coffee. And honestly, it's probably a healthier one. Because coffee was never originally meant to feel like an adrenaline product. It was meant to feel grounding, comforting, steady, reliable. And once coffee companies started chasing intensity more than comfort, a lot of everyday drinkers slowly started feeling disconnected from the experience without fully understanding why. But the good news is this: not every coffee followed that direction equally, and once people understand what changed, it becomes much easier to recognize the coffees that still preserve some of that older feeling. Once people understand what changed about modern coffee, something interesting starts happening. They stop chasing intensity all the time, and that alone changes the entire experience. Because many longtime coffee drinkers are not actually searching for stronger coffee anymore. They're searching for coffee that feels complete again. Coffee that feels calming instead of exhausting. Coffee that stays enjoyable through the entire mug. Coffee that still feels good on the 5th morning instead of only the first sip. And surprisingly, that usually starts with slowing down instead of upgrading everything. A lot of people assume the answer is buying the most expensive coffee possible. But price alone does not solve this problem. In fact, some expensive supermarket coffees are part of the exact issue people have been feeling. Beautiful packaging, Huge promises, aggressive flavor. Then somehow the experience still feels strangely empty after a few days. Meanwhile, certain simpler coffees quietly continue doing something many modern brands forgot how to do. They stay comfortable. That's why many longtime coffee drinkers eventually begin noticing patterns that have nothing to do with hype. For example, medium roasts often feel more satisfying long-term than extremely dark roasts. Not weaker, more balanced. The aroma survives better. The sweetness survives better. The coffee itself still feels present underneath the roasting. And for many people, that becomes immediately noticeable once they stop overwhelming their palate with extremely dark coffee every morning. Another thing people begin noticing is freshness. Not fancy freshness marketing. Real freshness. Coffee opened recently. Coffee stored properly. Coffee consumed steadily instead of forgotten in a cabinet for months. That alone changes aroma dramatically. And aroma matters more emotionally than many people realize, because smell is deeply connected to memory. That's why certain coffees instantly remind people of early mornings, growing up parents making coffee, quiet kitchens, weekend routines, older diners and restaurants conversations that lasted longer than they do today. Coffee used to feel more connected to life itself. And many people are not actually mourning flavor alone. They're mourning that feeling. That's an important distinction, because once people understand that, they stop expecting modern supermarket coffee to magically recreate emotional memory through strength alone, and suddenly the experience becomes simpler again. A calmer medium roast, a cleaner cup, less bitterness, less caffeine overload, less chasing intensity. Ironically, that often brings people closer to the older coffee experience they missed in the first place. And this is also where many people rediscover coffees they ignored for years. Sometimes a simple medium roast from Peet's Coffee feels more satisfying long-term than an ultra-dark high-performance blend. Sometimes coffees from Lavazza feel smoother simply because they focus more on balance than shock value. Sometimes even familiar supermarket coffees like 8 o'clock coffee or certain roasts from Dunkin' remain enjoyable because they never fully abandoned drinkability chasing extreme intensity. Not every bag will be amazing. But the important thing is understanding what your palate is actually looking for now. Because many people spend years buying stronger coffee, when what they truly miss is softness, aroma, balance, and comfort. And once people realize that, shopping for coffee suddenly becomes much easier. The loudest packaging stops mattering as much. The words extra bold, maximum strength, turbo roast, extreme caffeine start feeling less impressive. And people begin paying attention to completely different things instead. How the coffee smells after opening, how it feels halfway through the cup, whether the bitterness builds too aggressively, whether they genuinely want another cup tomorrow morning. That last part matters a lot more than most coffee reviews admit. Because the best daily coffee is usually not the one that shocks people once. It's the one people quietly continue enjoying for months. Many coffees today are built to create reaction, not relationship. And honestly, that idea applies to far more than coffee now. A lot of modern products became louder, stronger, more stimulating, more optimized for immediate reaction, but not necessarily more satisfying long-term. Coffee simply became one of the easiest places for people to notice it happening, especially long-time coffee drinkers who still remember when products were built more around routine and longevity than instant impact. And maybe that's the real reason coffee doesn't feel the same anymore. Not because people forgot how to make coffee, not because every coffee became bad, but because modern coffee slowly shifted away from comfort and moved closer toward performance, intensity, and shelf impact. And once people recognize that shift, they stop blaming themselves for losing taste or needing stronger coffee. They realize they were noticing something real all along. And strangely enough, that realization alone often makes coffee enjoyable again. Because the feeling many people missed was never really caffeine. It was familiarity. If this reminded you of your own experience with coffee over the years, I'd genuinely like to hear what changed for you first. And if someone else in your life still talks about how coffee used to taste years ago, send this video to them too.